for just a few years, and probably is a familiar face to most of you. So, without further ado, take it away,
I
Shelley.
know. So I know this topic I know isn't very super exciting. However, there was some new guidance came out in TCPS regarding this. And as you know, with almost all research guidelines, there's interpretation. And I think even the REBs were possibly interpreting one of the articles to the extreme. And so I think they thought they would provide some guidance. I know Tarpin's been asking me to provide a topic. I said, you know, in the REB, there's not much change, and then the people that come to these presentations aren't the ones that I maybe need to be talking to specific issues, but you guys are all, I could just tell by looking here, you're the ones doing everything. So really, I am not this, how to address material incidental findings, TCPS 2 2018, however, this document actually wasn't released until late into 2019. That just tells you when you have something in the government, how many different processes it has to go through before it's released. So it's 2 years old, but really it's only being released. And it was provided to the REB members, telling them, okay, when we come up with a situation, but we haven't really sat down and looked at it. And I'm not quite sure. I think we would have dealt with some of these things in this manner, but I do know from talking to the chairs, they think it will be very helpful. So there's nothing new. And the issue here is that really, as in almost all applications, it's you as this guideline particularly, you're going to, as the researcher, going to be providing the information because you'll probably be the experts. So basically that's what I'm doing today, is just kind of going through, telling you another guide to use. There are other guidelines out there, bioethics, because a lot of incidental findings occur in genetics. And there are some other universities that have already, prior to this TCPS guideline, we're starting to develop guidelines, which I'm sure the working group probably were those people that were involved. So I'll just kind of go ahead then and make sure I get this right. So basically, as the definition, we're going to find out what incidental findings are, what are material incidental findings, and to maybe just understand the determinants of what makes an incidental finding material, okay? And to understand some of the guidance in the document and relating to how this should be communicated to participants. Oops, sorry. So it all kind of starts on this principle in TCPS 2, which says, within the limits of consent provided by the participants, researchers shall disclose to the participant any material incidental findings discovered in the course of research. So that shall, you know, when you read shall, it means you must do it almost. So I think that was often what was being interpreted by REBs, that it should be done. And so that kind of left them sometimes struggling with some times maybe when there could be reasons maybe not for doing it. So that's where the basis is. So basically the purpose of this guidance is, I've underlined REBs, it's to assist you as researchers, but as well as the REBs in trying to address these material incidental findings in the course of research. So basically, I think not too difficult, but as per TCPS is how we're going to define it. It's a discovery about research participants or prospective participants that is made in the course of research, but is outside the objectives of the research study. We'll get into a few examples, which makes it... their material, of course, if they are reasonably determined to have significant welfare implications for their participant or prospective participant. That can be any stage of the research and any type of research. So I think in the past, we may not have thought even a retrospective records review, because maybe you're going to be going through a bunch of charts and all of a sudden you're going to find, oh my goodness, you're doing this. This is increased prevalence of this particular condition. Maybe we need, maybe we need to do something about this. So, but again, here it says significant. So sometimes there can be interpretation of, REB and the researcher on that. And that's why I think the real important thing with this whole thing is going to be the dialogue between the REB and between the researcher of how to deal with this. And so I think the main purpose of this document is to indicate this. So what are some of the contributors to this increased probability? I mean, we've always had incidental findings. I think it's always been there. But as you know, there's rapid technological advances. So when you designed this study a while ago, also now you have the capability of actually understanding this. The evolution of research capabilities, the large volumes of data with our administrative health databases, maybe we'll be able to find something out there. I couldn't think of an example there, but I can understand that could happen. And again, the push for innovation, which is quite, we notice it in the REB as well. So these are the most simple examples, and the ones that we have had to deal with, and often the unexpected mask or vascular abnormality in a CT or MRI. So, you're getting MRI for this condition. Got to step back, sorry. And all of a sudden, it's a whole body MRI, and now you find another condition. Or particularly when it becomes a concern is when you have control participants. And there are some studies where there are actually MRIs, they have controls. So what are you going to do about that? And the genetic, as we say, the genome. And these are the other ones that we've had. We even have an example. I'll talk about it because I don't totally understand it, but I'll tell you how we kind of dealt with it within cancer care. And then you have to think about this, which is interesting, because the discovery of physical abuse or suicidalities in studies unrelated to those phenomena. Now, of course, when you're doing a study in those areas, well, that's expected, anxiety, depression. But increasingly, a lot of your drug studies, because the effects of drug, we're asking these questions. And now what are you going to do about it? And interestingly enough, you probably noticed from our REB submission form, we specifically ask about that. And that's because quite a few years ago, we had a psychiatrist on our board, and he felt you cannot ask that question, tell people that they have an increased susceptibility, have this depression and possibility without doing something. It doesn't mean that you have to go through the whole assessment, but at least some type of assessment. So it's interesting. So now they're looking at that as a potential incidental finding. So factors to consider. So what would make an incidental finding material? This is what they'll talk about. And who is going to make that determination of materiality? So these are some key factors, and I'm from the ethics, I'm not the scientist, and that's why the researcher is, well, I shouldn't say. So for me to present this, I'd have to really research it, but I'm saying is that the researcher will most likely know that or will seek the expertise. So verify the accuracy and precision. We know that some DEXA scans right now really are still very research purposes, and how accurate are they? Is it an artifact of research methodology? And often you may have to consult experts with respect to this. There's some lab personnel that are doing, studies in genetics, but they may not have that experience of the significance of that. And again, the potential significance, is it immediate or in the future? You have to think about that. Implications to others, which is where a lot of the true ethical issues come into. And the researcher and the participant's perspective of the significance of it can be quite different. And I'll maybe talk about a case, maybe not quite an incidental finding, but just give you an idea of how a participant and researcher may think about it differently. And then actionability. Is there something you can do about it? So that is going to make, you find this finding, well, right now there isn't anything you do about it. And I kind of recall, I've been around long enough in nursing, and maybe a few of you here have, but I can tell by looking at these young faces, not. But I remember when MRIs came out, and MRIs, they were doing these whole MRIs, and they were finding these, masses and things, but nobody knew how to read them. And they didn't know what that was. That's how long I've been around, okay? That just tells you, remember that I remember when they came out, and they says, okay, it's even the experts didn't know how to necessarily read them. So so the actionability. So who makes the determination? I think this is expertise, okay? And you have to maybe think of professional standards with respect to maybe where that's required. So that's why the REB may not, that particular meeting, have those criteria. So it's really a lot of this is coming from the researcher. So in the management plan, factors to consider, so for researchers in REB, is challenges. We have to think about that. Is the management plan going to be required? This is all in the TCPS 2 document, you guys. Really, I'm not making any, I haven't done a huge lot of work here. Basic elements of the management plan. And then what is the researcher's obligation to disclose? And when does that end? I think this document actually, that is maybe the point that maybe was probably helpful. I think the other issues we probably could have figured out what's included, but I think it helps us a little bit with those factors. So the challenges, as you can imagine, are that what we talked about before, the predictability. You may not know that right now, right? Things changed with the advances. planning, the discovery, validation, management, communication, review of the consent to the receipt of those material incidental findings. How are you going to deal with it in there? Exactly. These are all, definite challenges we recognize. Things that maybe a plan should consider, basically, is, again, as we talked about this kind of before, it's a lot repetitive. Is it reasonably foreseeable? They're not reasonably foreseeable. And then maybe the circumstances why you would justify the obligation maybe not to disclose that. So that would be, again, coming from the from the researcher, providing us with that type of information. So requirements: develop a plan and submit it to the REB. And these don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a whole huge protocol. Sometimes it can be, one page with some consideration. Inform participants or family for those that lack capacity about disclosure during the consent process, that, if it's determined this is required. And often plans, this is what the TCPS says, will be required for most genetic research, okay? So, and I'm getting into a little bit more detail. So if there's other areas where maybe there wouldn't necessarily be a requirement, but you're going to have to probably in genetic research think about what you're going to do about this, at least some type of talk. So that's what that may be helpful. It'll take a while for REB to get into this as well. So management plans, basically just kind of highlighting the fact this is what TCPS says in the application of Article 3.4. It says, so findings are reasonably foreseeable. You will, a plan really should, again, should is not shall or must. And for genetic research, they are required, they're saying. So some guidance when it's not foreseeable, not reasonably foreseeable. Think about a process to follow in case it did come. So you may, although it's not in this immediate future, if something came about, well, how would you possibly handle it? So just that anticipation. And maybe in some of them it's, they're close to it. It's not there right now. But and I guess that this is why it's so wishy-washy, and to try to say this is what you have to do is very difficult. So, and again, in the event of an unexpected discovery, incidental findings that are likely to material, researcher needs to report to the REB. So if it also did happen, there's the possibility you won't have an idea, and they're just saying, okay, well then you have to report to the REB, which you would have done anyways. It's not anything big. And develop a management plan at that time for the REB, how to deal with it. And if participants are to be negatively impacted and the time is of essence to mitigate that risk, you would have to implement it. And so that is something, that's nothing new. TCPS has those requirements. If there's anything, if you're going to make a change to the protocol because the liver enzymes have increased such that you need to implement this, future monitoring or extra, you have to do that, or dialysis patients, something has to be done. Always the end, you have to implement a plan immediately. You'd be able to do that and then contact us after. So I would think possibly it's unlikely in incidental findings for this to occur, but just to give you that idea. Always do that and just respond to us after. As I get older, I also cannot see past 2 feet. And I think this is just saying, again, just basically what TCPS, the application of it, it's helped us a little bit more with that. So an exception to the obligation. So basically disclosures of such findings would be impossible or impractical. Thousands of people, and it would maybe, again, the impact wouldn't be that great, but not merely just an inconvenience. I think it's the same thing as previous before. It's rarely, we have had one protocol right now where they've really pushed the REB, not in incidental findings, but on other issues of consent. It would be just, the rationale was be inconvenient, and just don't use that word of the REB. Just find another reason. I'm not kidding you. It's just not the thing to say. Researcher provides the REB a justification for seeking such an exception, and that's just so we do look at those reasons quite well. So again, just trying to let you know where it is, how that's where I've taken this from. So exception, I just want to talk a little bit about this on biobanks. There's lots of biobanks out there. Sometimes the current policy is not to return individual results. Participants would have consented to the no return policy, And so I think the REBs just sort of think about this a little bit, and maybe it's not that the person still has a right not to find out, but as we talked about before, the impact on other people, you may want to word in such a way to think about that, and to think about if something becomes of significant importance that, you need to contact the individuals. And maybe if this is if you're maybe and I can't think, maybe biobanks aren't that way, but if revisit this policy and maybe revisit it for future participants of how to handle that. And I think we'll have to, I think we're going to get our experience from people coming in. Just kind of a little bit of a plug for this is that I don't know if cancer people will know CedarNet is this really fantastic program out in UBC by a previous researcher, Dr. Watson? Peter Watson. I always said. Anyways, he's got this educational program, and I know it's a matter of it's above the REB, but he's got BC has made it mandatory that if you're going to have a biobank, and a biobank may be retaining samples, I forget it is. It's like if you're retaining samples beyond 3 months, that's a biobank. So just understanding that you will be required to go through this. Some person in the research team will be required to go through this mandatory educational package. So we're trying to encourage people to consider that when they think about developing a biobank. There's going to be lots of policies in there, SOPs, which will be very helpful. Hopefully the idea of standardizing some of the REB issues, as well as actually collection and what do you call it, and handling of specimens. So I just want to put that plug in because I think it's important. We're kind of waiting for higher people above us to give us this mandate. Dr. Watson's really trying to push this, and I think it's a very good program. It's extensive, but I think at least the main custodian of the bank should be considering this. So just to give you a bit of a warning that I tend to be out there. I'm sure Cancer Care is basically following the policies and SOPs there already, but I think it's a little smaller biobanks that would be a very good idea. And I have directed a few people there, and they found it helpful. So yeah.
Sorry, what was that resource again?
CedarNet. So it's Canadian. It's CTRNET, and it's out of he's in Victoria, but it's out of UBC. Dr. Peter Watson. He was here in Winnipeg. He was here actually. He developed the breast tumor bank. He's leading. In fact, Australia has commissioned him to use that educational. It's that good. Okay, so it's just a little bit of a Winnipeg plug there. So a management plan, of course, just the idea, they will differ. So that's why for the REBs, I don't think we really need another guidance document. I think we will refer people to use this TCPS 2 rather than getting a whole bunch of other documents in. But because it really will depend on the research, will be based on the best predictions. The idea is that there'll be continuing ethics review as well, including the management plan as you change. And just to let you know that actually TCPS has all these guidelines with respect to continuing review that, in a way, this apply. You find there's an incidental finding, you have to let the REB know, you have to manage a continuing review, a change. So in a way, it was all there before. Is this document just specifically addresses that? Basic elements, again, it's kind of the likelihood of discovery, the management of the findings, the consent, are they reasonably for what different stages of research. So this is why they really did break this down. A lot of times repetitive, but this could happen at different stages of the research as well. So anticipate that, yeah, it may not be now, but in this stage later on. And if yes, when does the researcher anticipate that the research will yield such findings? Again, it could be very difficult. And again, it's all very speculative. How does the researcher plan to determine it? What findings will be disclosed? And justification for not disclosing it? And who will be responsible for communicating the findings is an important issue. I guess I'll just kind of bring up, I don't know if this is the exact play, but I mean, Cancer Care actually had a case that we, as the REB, were consulted with. These were, in fact, I believe, I don't know totally anonymized samples, but definitely de-identified. There was the idea that this research had been done with a waiver of consent on a large sample of samples, but the technology has advanced so rapidly, this was done quite a few years ago, that they now found a particular factor that could actually, and now there was care plan. These people would benefit from this care plan. So these researchers and cancer care were in this dilemma. We have this information. However, we said to people we weren't going to report the results back to them. This is a long time ago. So this REB, we sat down, and it seemed quite reasonable that because of the impact for individuals, I guess the close, cancer care, the close research clinical practice relationship also made it a little bit easier. But they developed a very clear plan for us even before they met with us. They recognized these dilemmas as to who of those individuals they already had developed criteria and how they would go about contacting them. So just to give you an idea, that's a dialogue with the REB in a challenging situation. Okay. Because that's, the waiver was provided because it says we're not going to make future contact. At the time, they said, what we're doing is good. This is just research. Well, with the technology advancing, they probably thought it wouldn't be during the lifetime of these individuals, but now there was something that could be of definite benefit to the individuals. So I think the REBs, it was dealt with cancer care. I mean, we probably, as the REB, we didn't understand the technology of Dr. Arnett, but it was definitely a very well thought out and a definite exception. So and the other issue is, will participants be able to choose the information they wish or wish not to receive, when to receive it, and will researchers seek at the beginning of the research or as the research progresses? So I guess that may be something you could think about as if it's a long study, is that, maybe you would during the middle, you know what, this research is advancing. Initially you said if there was something you would not want to know, would you want to know if it had an impact? Just maybe those are some things to consider. But I do think this choosing not to disclose today with the advancements, I think it should be thought about. And the management of the consent, of course, the capacity, that's as in any other research and regaining capacity. And then also recognizing the limitations to receive or not receive because of the duty to report if it would happen to be infectious diseases, some incidental finding. I guess you have to think about those things but generally that would hopefully be dealt with, anyways. So I think the question of when does it end, and we always struggle when does research end? Is it after you finish analyzing data? Privacy now has issues, and Hep C, we used to think as REB collected the data, basically REB approval no longer required, but now with secondary use, it's fuzzy, okay? I recognize it's very fuzzy, and even for us. But it's not specified in TCPS 2, probably for a reason, because it is difficult to determine. It will depend on the nature of the research project and may depend on the research design. If you can anticipate, probably help us out. And the obligation to disclose can be linked to the duration. I would think of the research study, basically. Okay, so I guess biobanking can be a little bit different, but I think your obligation in other studies is probably during the research study, unless something really significant comes out. And so try to, if you're able to, try to outline this when you're going to do this in the management plan, and the REB will, of course, make a determination on that, but it's going to be, again, the researcher who has the expertise that's going to be coming to us and telling them why they think it would only be required at this time. And then, of course, the big thing is the researchers have to honor, that's the thing, what they say in the consent form. So be very careful as well of what you're saying in the consent form. We're increasingly finding this out in other issues, saying, well, you're going to destroy your samples at 5 years, and all of a sudden 10 years long they're coming to us and saying, well, we've got these samples at this time, and we want to do this on them. And we go back, well, you told people you were destroying them. So it's just that issue, and you weren't going to transfer them to anybody else. They were just going to stay there. And we're recognizing now, I know in just this past month, with respect to that, it was a little fuzzy on they saying it sounded like they were just going to stay here in Manitoba. And so one of the comments is that indicating to them, you may want to put a comment in that your samples may need to go to other laboratories for analysis because maybe you don't have the expertise here. And that's because with now increasingly data sharing agreements between, they look at the contracts, and they had contacted me one, and actually that one was quite clear, it was okay. But they're starting to look at it. So, well, they said the samples were going to UBC, but now you're sending them to Laval University. Well, the REB, we kind of look at it a little differently, is that it's being sent to the Laval for their own research purposes because the researcher at the Laval is, wanting to study this, or are they being sent to Laval because Laval, it's like out of contract. Laval has the expertise to do the particular analysis that was discussed in the research proposal. So we look, like an REB, we look a little differently, but of course you have to realize people in the contracts office may not know that. So that's just something that I think we have to think about is that, when you're submitting them, that, they may go to other laboratories for analysis, or they may be shared, and that's, with other people. Maybe not being too restrictive. I mean, there may be cases when it can't be, or it shouldn't be because of the sensitivity of the information. I also know with this whole publication issue now, which is kind of, publishers want data to be retained forever and shared and all this. And so we are starting to, tell people, think about this, think about putting a statement. And I guess it was in a very interview with women on, the sexual identity, and a very personal issue that we would never, ever share our data with anybody else. And I mean, that made total sense, right? But we were just telling about the publisher. So again, just coming to us why you wouldn't do that is good. So, okay, and then this is what information would you share, when, with whom, and how would it be shared? Simple. And just recognizing that you have to exercise care and sensitivity to determine who discloses that information. Sometimes we have some studies where we've had, and I don't, it's not discrediting certainly, but the PhD is doing some research in the lab on some genetic analysis, and has actually indicated they would disclose these, they would send the results out. Well, do they really have that expertise? Especially if it's genetics, probably you would be getting genetic counselors involved, and maybe if it's a pretty serious condition, you maybe need to talk to a clinician how to approach that particular family. And again, all within the confines of the confidentiality issues, which gets to be difficult. So again, just challenges and considerations, only informed about the exact details of the findings after they are discovered, often difficult to predict. Possibility may not have been previously raised in the consent form. Difficult for participants to understand the significance of the material incidental findings for them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Circumstances may change over time for a participant, which can have an effect on the participant's decision to continue or agree or to refuse the material incidental findings. And it's just interesting right now. There was a study, trying to keep it partially confidential, but kind of done across Canada, and one of the components is DEXA scanning. And so we just actually had a participant complain. Halfway through the study, they did change how they scored the DEXA, and I don't understand all this. So we got the participant complaint because they had, they got their scans, they had 3 throughout the period of time, and they were not informed of the grave significance of this. And they had a medical personnel student in their family who said this was absolutely just terrible, and this was a complaint. So of course I'm trying to figure out on the phone, get a few more details and all that. So this is an example of there was actually a whole process, that they had been told in the consent form, but of course, when did they sign the consent form that these were just for research purposes? The scoring had changed halfway through of how they were scoring this. The participants were told about that, but still this participant, when they looked at it. So, it's just a situation. And I guess initially, a research coordinator, when they contacted her, maybe didn't provide the information. And so it's going to be resolved very, very easily. They're going to tell them what to do. But even actually, they were told to go talk to this with the doctor. But even their own doctor thought this was fairly significant and why something wasn't being done. So just really important when you handle this. Probably at the time these results, they actually didn't, in this study, they didn't even want to hand out the results. But how people want these, and they, I guess, insisted. And so they were, probably in that case, really sitting down with the participant and telling them about it, because they just didn't understand. And I guess that's one of the issues of research in that. But I think that's difficult. But just to think about that, how confusing this could be. I know sometimes they don't want to hand out results, but people ask for them, right? But then I think if that's the case, you really have to go over it in that. But just to give you an example, and you can imagine how this can be with people's understanding. So it would have to be very delicate and in certain situations, really thought out. So as you can imagine, challenges, anxiety and distress in some situations. You could also, now you're just doing a simple study, and you didn't expect these control participants to have a brain tumor, and now the research coordinator, well, what are you going to do? So if you have a plan in place, a list of who you could contact, you can just imagine for the anxiety of the staff as well. Some of the other challenges are, which was interesting, it brought up here, of course, family members and genetics, we know that. So now you've got this result, well, it's infecting your sister, your brother, and everybody else. Oh my goodness. So you as a researcher, you will definitely be getting genetics involved. Most likely we would have, hopefully the REB would have said a geneticist would have been even on in the protocol. But new technology, you never know what happens, right? The decision has implications for an authorized third party who may, for example, be the parent of a child. I never even thought about this, is that actually, this they say about the stress, actually the parents are involved in the genetic study for their child, and all of a sudden now they find out it's that type of genetics where it may have an impact on them, and now they're distressed because now do they have to talk to their family members? I never had thought about it as that way until this thing. And so you're normally not required to share beyond participants, but participants' wishes for it to be shared, you may have to consider that. So, you know, and how important would that be? How are they going to share that? And again, exactly how are they going to share that? Because now you only have the participant, but then they want to go and tell their family members and the distress and how could this be done? You know, probably you would want to be genetic testing. So it's just lots of things to consider when you have these issues. So contacting participants, again, reasonable efforts, the issues of, you know, maybe lack of capacity to understand and how you're going to do that so that you don't get people distressed. Not discussed, you didn't discuss the initial consent process, so now it's got to be very careful how you're going to bring this up. And then the secondary use of information, discuss with REB the obligation strategy, of course, confidentiality issues. So those are issues with respect to consent. As I say, you've done a chart review and you found something, and now, well, the rationale for not obtaining the initial chart review or consent for the initial chart review is that you weren't going to be discussing the results with participants. So this would be definitely something you would be, of course, presenting to the REB and possibly even privacy officers. And again, depending how important this is, we may be able to outweigh those issues as well. So again, just communication, this is another topic, communicate with the REB, and of course we mentioned before obligations to your, possibly maybe to, you know, child welfare and communicable disease legislation. And it's just so you know that I got this from somewhere. So I went on, I was trying to find a few case studies on the website with respect to this, just giving you an idea, and they're not, some of them are more just incidental findings as a result of clinical issues, which is a little bit different. But this is, here's one, research results indicate a significant health concern for a research participant. However, the results are delinked from the participant. So as we've had some. Identity, and although technically possible, relinking them would violate the terms of informed consent, which promise individuals that their confidentiality would be preserved through total anonymization and a promise not to re-identify the research samples. So I guess I kind of go, well, then they really weren't anonymized initially, and I think a lot of people don't really understand that. They often tell us this is anonymized, and we're trying to educate people with respect to that. And it's not that we're saying you should anonymize, because for this exact reason, but don't tell people that it is anonymized when really your samples are. We're not making you do that. Yeah, that's the ultimate protection, but we recognize sometimes that really limits your research. But this is an example. This would be something that you would definitely be talking to the REB about, and we would have to really consider this because of those issues, and it would have to probably have a fairly significant impact for participants. But just, you know, well, I guess the cancer care one wouldn't have said anonymized. We wouldn't have been we would have said we wouldn't have contacted people. So it's not quite the same. The research aims to focus on a specific genetic variant. However, the proposed methods called for this WGS because it is a more efficient approach, exact new technology now. Notwithstanding the fact that researchers have no intention of analyzing the data gathered on the other genetic markers. And such data may include information that could be relevant to participants' healthcare decision making. So just that idea is that maybe now we've got these samples, oh, they've got this technology, we can do something, but researchers really don't want to. And that's maybe more of a clinical situation. But just, these are a few, just like I said, a few case examples. And the research results will be processed, and this occasionally happens in a non-CLI approved laboratory because there is no CLIA laboratory that performs the research test at issue. However, the researchers anticipate that the results will uncover information that could be relevant to participants' health and decision making. There's some, again, I'm always mentioning cancer care, and I think it's because the biological samples are so important to their research. I guess it's almost what everything is based on. But sometimes, and genetics, there are often some research laboratories down in the States that will do a specific test that's not part of standard of care, not available, but could help them in their diagnosis of the testing. And because it's a research laboratory, often they consult with us because it doesn't need REB approval. And often it's really not per se research. And, you know, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. They're actually sending it down there for clinical purposes. And I think this kind of be the situation, what could happen with this? And it's more of a clinical setting. I didn't actually also realize that. I was just talking to one of the chairs that, you know, with Lyme disease, how there's been this that, oh, the Canadian labs aren't quite as good as the US labs. Well, there are these labs out in the States that will look at one factor and, you know, they're not, well, I guess they're certified. It's a little bit difficult. Come back and say they have Lyme disease, but yet standards, you know, by CEDIC and NIH say all these factors have to be, and it's unlikely by just that one component on it. It was kind of interesting. There are these other labs that are coming up providing people these, saying, yeah, it looks like you have Lyme disease when you may not even have it. So this is why when people always say, well, you know, I even know someone says, well, the Canadian testing isn't as good. How to go down to this US lab? And I'm saying, oh, that's odd, because that, but, you know, so some of these labs that aren't, they're for profit, I guess, not as similar. So it's interesting just so that you, some of those situations you have to know. So here's another case study, and this is just more, again, a person who was very, you know, sad. Of course, she was study researcher also. Hospital, she had her surgery. Of course, that was very good for her, and that's the case. And we do okay. We have had very few, but when we have controls, controls, MRI, we've had a few cases where that has occurred. Very few, but it has occurred. So, you know, a person's coming in thinking they're totally healthy now, and naturally in that case, it would be, I mean, the decision to forward them to the clinician. I mean, something has to be done. But I think for almost the research staff, how they really, you know, you've got this distressed person, you've got these results. Who's going to send? Who's going to do it? And who's going to take care of it when, you know, they weren't expecting it? This is the one where I kind of found this was interesting. It's on. I have the website later on, but investigating MS because her son is affected. Barbara and her family assumed their normal life, although she expected news from her sons to answer his issues, was surprised when she received a phone call that some information had been uncovered that affected her specifically. I was actually quite, you know, I thought you would think with the MS, you know, you'd think of you're sending your son yourself. But Barbara went in to meet with the researchers and learned that while doing these studies on MS, they discovered an incidental connection between Barbara's genes and a greatly increased chance of Alzheimer's disease after 65. Barbara is about to celebrate her 55th birthday, is devastated. This is not such medical action Barbara can take, and though she is healthy and active, the new worries Barbara to the end. And I guess this is on some research websites, so they ask. They say they're asking people to vote and what do you think should be done. So you can, I guess, just trying to, although I provide these guidance, it really is going to be case by case in many cases, and that's often with ethics. I know a lot of people try to say, well, can we do this? And they ask, I know I just had a question the other day, can we do this? Which is an open-ended question. I go, give me like another 20 points here so I understand what you mean by can we do this? And so it really is often, each research study has to be evaluated on its own. That just gives you an idea of some of the issues. Now, I did happen to, there's some sample wording from the Sick Kids Consent template, but it's actually quite extensive, and I don't really want to put all this in, but if you were really doing, I think they have some MRI. See if I'll open it up now, because sometimes, you know, when you do this, I tried it on my computer, and it did. It may not. Sometimes when I come and do presentations, it won't. But anyways, that's the link. I was going to try again, because it did, as I say, I got it going at my but I've had this problem before when I come. But anyways, they have some stuff exactly on MRI, and all the ones they have I think it is 3 pages on just talk about MRI, reasonably, not reasonably. Get the other scenario. They also have on genetics some stuff, because I think the sick kids with and the reason I decided to do this was because it was kind of talking also kids, how you would kind of handle it with kids, right? So I don't know. Do you have any other questions? I think the theme, the message is to communicate with REB, think about this ahead of time, because of the advancement of research. I think this could potentially be something important. I think that's it. We're done early today, aren't we?
Oh, we're not done yet. I know I have some questions, but if anyone else has questions first, or I don't know if they can ask questions online, maybe?
I requested them to
Okay.
write down their
Okay.
ideas.
So I have a very related, but not
related.
something
But
I
it's
touched
okay.
on
It's
today,
okay. Yeah.
And something we just had a discussion around my research with the legal department around consent for items that may be disclosed. So not necessarily MRI findings, but if we're interviewing a parent and they say that they're using cannabis in their child, but it's not authorized, that is illegal. So around wording in a consent form that may state that we may have to disclose, like according to, you have a duty to report health and safety information, especially around a child, and how we could word some of that wouldn't maybe scare parents to think that, we're collecting data so we can report on you, or, if we didn't view it as a health and safety risk, that line is so blurry.
No, and it is very blurry, especially, when you have, where it really becomes difficult is in those studies where you are looking at child abuse. I mean, and that is really
or if you're not looking
difficult.
at
But you're not looking at child.
but
But I mean,
up.
but it's how I guess it's how likely is it to come up in a study where you're not looking at child abuse, right? I mean, if they happen to talk about it, I mean, my goodness, it is difficult, and I think it'd be a case-to-case situation. Again, it's just, I think you have to, maybe in a case like that, you would keep, if it's not a study about child abuse, where it's the likelihood of it coming up, but it's possible, right? A more basic statement, just saying, there are legal requirements to report some things, and the person would naturally know if you said that. And plus, when you're talking to them, it says, I guess I would think when you're talking to them and this comes up, you would start saying, I have to report this because you said this, right? And I know there's researchers when they have those deception studies, but that's why I say I think it really depends on the likelihood. You're interviewing parents who are struggling with parenting, and the mothers who are in relationships with, I think, who's present last week when I went to Indigenous, there was one, working with mothers who are in, abusive relationships. That's where you would have to have a plan in place if this came up of how you would deal with it, right? Because the likelihood. But in other type of studies, I mean, the cannabis one now that it's a little bit more free and open, the issue may not be as
It's still not legal, and that's the
yeah,
problem,
I know.
right?
I know, and it's
parents are talking about it a lot more, and that puts us in a situation where we're being told things that are happening that are illegal. And we may not feel necessarily compromising health and safety, but just because I don't feel that doesn't mean that you presented with the same data might not feel that.
But the thing is that, again, I think that would be the dialogue with the REB, because if it is a reportable event, it's likely it's going to happen, you have to say it. You can. The REB will not allow you not to, because it's illegal. It's illegal. It can't override it, right? So that is the situation. But again, I think when we're talking through this, is the probability. It's how you're going to deal with it. Is what is the probability of that occurring, right? As I say, in that study, when you're talking to women that are in an abusive relationship, and you're asking some questions that may came up, that likelihood you're going to have a plan of how you're going to deal with it if that happens, right? But if it's, your cannabis, I guess it's illegal. I think now, I just have to say that it may not be as, maybe a little easier to do it. But you're right. I mean, it just comes down to if it's legal, if it's reporting. Now, you get a little confused because we had somebody, I think they submitted something, or they were told by another agency we had to get back to them. Child abuse is reportable, the fact that you're going to commit suicide is not reportable, right? It's not a reportable event. We want you to do something for the welfare of the individual, but it's not reportable. You're going to murder someone is of course you say you're going to report it, but the fact you're going to harm yourself is not a reportable. You know what I'm saying? You harm yourself. That is something you have to. We want you to act on, but it's not a legally reportable event. So sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to. I mean, this is something that we just kind of learned. And there was another one that they said they were going to report, and I can't remember what it was, but. Yeah, so of course murdering somebody else, child abuse, but like I say, harming yourself is not legally reportable. A clinician responsibility to do something about it, but you don't have to report it to the police or it's illegal. So that's what I'm saying. I think this document is I think the important issue I'm trying to stress is that dialogue with the REB, and we'll hopefully try to help you out. But we may come back and say, sorry, you have to have something in there. But I think the wording, you have to tell it how it is. But you're right. I think sometimes we've even seen one of our layperson says, well, you're gonna die. You could die from taking this, like very, very. Very, 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 very rare risk in some disease. I'm not saying cancer is a little bit different because some of those studies, these people that's a probability, but really rare. We thought, well, he thought that was so harsh to say that, and particularly in this study, it would have been harsh because it was so. We say, you could kind of talk about that, but not. It was just this. You could die. And it was like, well, and no further explanation. Just the way it was written by the researchers. I mean, they're told there's a probability, but again, it's dialogue. But the cannabis, we just had another study of cannabis, and the REB is still struggling with some because of the legalities of it. And so I have to say, yeah. And sometimes I don't necessarily agree with the REB, like myself personally. But that's it's 9 people there.
You mean you don't represent everyone?
I don't represent everyone's opinion. I'm some ways I'm really forward thinking, in some ways I'm very backward. But but anyways, yeah. So I don't know if this is helpful, but it's.
I think it's.
So as far as I know Tarpin's been asking me for other topics, but it's really difficult right now with this whole rhythm movement. I don't really want to. We're just waiting for issues to come. There is some work on I anticipate we will be doing some multi-center. Studies where maybe we'll have a delegated review process. I anticipate there's movement toward that, but it's not structured. We're getting there. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to try. Yeah.
You can try.
Oh, okay, and just doing it from here. Maybe that's where. Okay, yeah. Maybe that's why. But I know I had it in slide. I did that. And you know what? This morning when I did it, put it in 2 spots so I could get it to work, and it worked in my slide. And then the next time it didn't. So I don't know.
Yeah, because.
But it all depends. It all depends on the connection here. I mean, you're talking about here.
Yes.
Just copy and paste or control click. Yeah.
Control. I'll let you do it. And then maybe just put it up. But are we connected to the internet? See, that's the thing. I know sometimes I've asked people.
We are.
Because I know when I sometimes do a presentation to show you how the REB forms work, I had, okay, so thank you. Okay, but if it's not up here.
No, you got to drag it.
Oh, you see, this is how I'm totally. So I'm just going to show you how, where is it now? I can't.
You have to look on there. It won't.
Yeah, but now it won't go down to the, where am I so I can get down to the section.
Oh.
So just change, just to give you an idea of how. Yeah, keep it going down and just show you how much.
Tell me when to stop.
I'll tell you when. Okay, just slow down a little bit. A little farther. Yeah, no, it's because it's 32 pages. I just tell you. Well, this is
for
template.
serial MRIs, yeah.
Summarizing.
Like you're not going to have everything. Yeah.
No. So just keep on going down.
Oh well, okay.
Because I was trying to copy it, but it was way too much, so I thought I'd just show you. And then this way, I didn't have to worry about. Say, I'm taking this from someone's website. It'll be. Yeah.
Oh, still.
I don't know if you'll find it that way.
How will samples be identified?
No, it's not even there. It's a little down. I think it's the nature of the risk. I guess I would have known this. a little farther, because it's 32 pages. Unless you did control finding when it's incidental. This is their template. You see what I'm saying? How I don't necessarily know if I want to necessarily put all this in there?
What is it?
Incidental.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's hard to type when you can't see what you're actually typing. Am I spelling that wrong?
Or even do MRI.
Incidental findings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
what if the researcher
So go a
discovers
little
something?
farther. So here, say, it described anticipated management plan. Yeah. And
Yeah,
then just keep on going. Example. So they have pediatric healthy volunteers, adult patients, and adult volunteers with reportable imaging. I don't know, and so they
Genetic
have,
incidental findings.
Genetic incidents. They have, so they have actually.
This is actually very,
which
very helpful.
Which is maybe helpful. It's just that, already as it is, we look at them anyways, and I'm afraid that they would actually just leave all that in. They said, well, you had it in your consent form, they don't. But anyways, but there's resources out there, and I know some people when they call, they say, well, what should I put in the consent form? I've done a little bit of search, and I kind of think, ask them, what is it? And I go online and I look at other, things. That is something we'll probably be working on. We're hoping to kind of adopt potentially, the Clinical Trials Ontario maybe consent template, which is actually fairly simple. That's the only problem with it, but it would be helpful for some studies. So, I had worked on it, but then I'm stepping back because of just with all the rhythm stuff. I just don't want to put a lot of effort into something and then it really be changed and then decide that maybe they're going to use another template. But I think, if it doesn't get done, in this year, then I will definitely be looking at our consent templates and probably asking Clinical Trials Ontario. I'm sure they want us. They would have no issue. That's the one thing about REBs. It's not like I have to, give them a fee for using their templates. They're all happy. And there's even a group working, just like, on the privacy section of consent forms to have a little more standardization across Canada, because that's probably the most important part. We don't have hang-ups too much about when people bring in their consent forms, the bodies of them it's the confidentiality section. So anyways, there is some information. It's a lot though, and you can imagine if you wouldn't want to put that in there if it's not like fairly probable.
But it might help inform some management plans and definitions of when and when not to report.
There's lots of stuff out there, but this one I thought was good because it had the perspective of the kids in it.
Any last questions? All right. Thank you, Shelley. Just so you know, next month we did have a speaker coming from Shared Health, but they don't have all their policies in